God of creation, there at the start, before the beginning of time. With no point of reference, you spoke to the dark and fleshed out the wonder of life. And as you speak, 100 billion galaxies are born. In the vapor of your breath, the planets form. And if the stars were made to worship so light, I can see your heart in everything you made. Every burning star, a signal fire of grace. And if creation sings your praises, so will I. God of your promise, you don't speak in vain, no syllable empty or void. For once you have spoken, all nature and science follow the sound of your voice. As you speak, 100 billion creatures catch your breath, evolving in pursuit of what you said. And if it all reveals your nature so alive, I can see your heart in everything you say. Every painted sky, a canvas of your grace. And if creation still obeys you, so will I. So will I. So will I. If the stars are made to worship, so will I. If the mountains bow in reverence, so will I. And if the oceans roar your greatness, so will I. For if everything exists to lift you high, so will I. And if the wind goes where you send it, so will I. If the rocks cry out in silence, so will I. If the sum of all our praises still falls short, then we'll sing again 100 billion God of salvation, you chase down my heart through all of my failure and pride. On a hill you created, the light of the world, abandoned in darkness to die. And as you speak, 100 billion failures disappear. Well, you lost your life so I could find it here. And if you left the grave behind you so alive, I can see your heart and everything you've done. Every part designed in a work of art called love. If you gladly chose surrender, so will I can see your heart a billion different ways. Every precious one, a child you died to save. And if you gave your life to love them so alive, like you would again 100 billion times, but what measure could amount to your desire? You're the one who never leaves the one behind.
Welcome, welcome, welcome to Contemplative Outreach International's conference, The Global Embrace, our Widening Reach, our Deepening Connection. My name is Mark Dannenfelser. I joined the Contemplative Outreach staff as program coordinator this past March, and I've been lucky enough to be part of this conference planning team. The team has worked for months and months preparing these next few days, and we are so thrilled to finally be here. And we are delighted that you are here. For this conference, we have over 1,200 people registered from over 280 different countries from around the globe. There will be many friends joining from many different time zones. So we expect that attendees will join for some sessions and perhaps be sleeping during other sessions. And some may even join us for a session and still end up being asleep during the session. Doesn't matter. We'll all be here in some form or another. And I'm so happy to be co-hosting this conference with my friend, Carol Quest. Hello, Carol.
Hello, Mark. So I'm happy to be here too. It's just a joy to be in a room full of members of Contemplative Outreach community. And just reminding everybody that the only need you have to be a part of this community is to practice centering prayer. That's a primary expression of belonging. The vision theological principle number 2, in case you didn't recognize it. But I also want to acknowledge all the volunteers, because this community lives on the efforts of volunteers. And Contemplative Outreach as a whole really wants to welcome the volunteers and make sure that this conference is a gift of gratitude for all you have done and are doing, and an opportunity to refresh and recharge. And I'd like to point out our theme, the global embrace, our widening reach, our deepening connection. So with the global embrace, remember that the fundamental purpose of centering prayer and contemplative outreach is to further the knowledge and experience of God's love in the consciousness of the whole human family. That's a pretty global embrace. theological principle number 1. Anyway, but we're widening our reach. As we move through this conference, you will hear many ways that members of our community are widening the reach of contemplative outreach. And I invite you to listen with the ear of your heart for the voice of the Spirit offering you ways to widen your reach in sharing the gift of centering prayer. We're also deepening our connection. Again, listening with the ear of our hearts as the Holy Spirit invites each of us to deepen our connections, our connection in the prayer, and our connection to one another, and our connection to the move of the Holy Spirit. So with that regard, I'm going to turn it back to Mark, who'll get us going.
We get started. We want to actually start our welcome in the words of the poet Rumi, to say, come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of leaving. It doesn't matter. Ours is not a caravan of despair. Come, even if you have broken your vows 1,000 times. Come yet again. Come, come. So to all of you who have come here today, and to those who will come here tomorrow and the next day, we say welcome. And we'd like to begin with a very special session here where that has to do with our centering prayer practices throughout this conference. We already had one about an hour or two ago. I don't remember now. Our first session will have a total of 7 centering prayer sessions. And we have a beautiful complement to the centering prayer sessions in that we're going to take, we'll be invited to take a few moments to reflect on the 7 invitations in centering prayer. Just before we reflected for a moment on the invitation to silence. And Maru de Guevara, who is a longtime member of Contemplative Outreach, has prepared a beautiful booklet, and we're going to allow her now via video to explain these invitations to us to help have enrich our centering prayer practices. So let me just say a word about Maru. She was born and raised in Mexico City and now resides in Florida in the US. She received her formation in contemplative leadership and spiritual guidance at the Shalem Institute in Washington, DC, and maintains now a practice as a spiritual director and an acupuncture physician in Largo, Florida. She's been a member of the Circle of Service of Extensión Contemplativa Internacional for almost 2 decades, serving retreats in the US and in Latin America. She also serves on the board for Contemplative Outreach. And she traveled with Father Thomas Keating to Mexico as his interpreter before he retired, and was privileged to work with him closely as part of his pastoral council. So with that rich heritage, we invite Maru to explain these 7 invitations to us via video. And thank you, Maru, for this beautiful offering.
Good evening to everyone, or good morning, afternoon, or whatever the case may be, wherever you are. My name is Maru Ladron de Guevara. Together with some of you, I've had the privilege of growing under the mentorship of Father Thomas Keating and observing the transmission of the contemplative dimension of the gospel alongside the communities of contemplative outreach and Extensión Contemplativa. Father Thomas knew it was not enough to bring the treasures of our contemplative tradition out of the monasteries and the cloisters, and that as we continued the journey, we would need the kind of supports that are embedded in the monastic life, adapted to lives in the world. He has left us a legacy of riches, which are now ours to plumb, live, and pass on. In an article called The 7 Stages of Centering Prayer, Father Thomas offers us 7 of those monastic supports. He presents them in the context of the ever-deepening self-surrender that takes place in the transforming process of centering prayer. He speaks of them as increasing levels of consent and depth of surrender. Silence as consent to God's presence within and among us. Solitude as flowing from interior silence, enabling us to drop the interior dialogue. And I would say solitude also enables us to drop our cultural programming until our hearts are returned to their original innocence. Solidarity. True solidarity flows from communion and solitude. And as we enter into union with God, we discover our interconnectedness with the human family and all of creation. Service flows from solidarity, following the ever-present inspirations of the Holy Spirit in all of life, sharing our gifts and resources with others. Stillness. If service is an outflow of oneness, stillness distills and purifies us in our service, leading to simplicity. Simplicity as a growing capacity to live in the midst of the ups and downs of daily life without losing our single eye, our unitive vision. And finally, surrender as the total gift of self to God, moving us from union to unity. Buenas noches, tardes, mañanas o lo que sea, donde quiera que ustedes estén. Mi nombre es Maru Ladron de Guevara y junto con algunos de ustedes he tenido el privilegio de crecer bajo la tutela del padre Thomas Keating y de servir la transmisión de la dimensión contemplativa del Evangelio lado a lado con las comunidades de Contemplative Outreach y de Extensión Contemplativa Internacional. El padre Thomas sabía que no sería suficiente traer los tesoros de nuestra tradición contemplativa fuera de los monasterios y claustros, y que al continuar la travesía necesitaríamos del tipo de apoyos que son parte de la vida monástica, adaptados a nuestras vidas en el mundo. Él nos ha dejado un legado de riquezas que ahora son nuestras para explorar, vivir y transmitir. En su artículo llamado Las 7 fases de la oración centrante, el padre Thomas nos ofrece 7 de esos apoyos monásticos. Nos los presenta en el contexto de la continua autoentrega que toma lugar en el proceso transformante de la oración central. Y nos habla de niveles crecientes de consentimiento y de profundidad de entrega. Del silencio como un consentir a la presencia y acción de Dios en nuestro interior y en todo. La soledad fluye del silencio y nos permite dejar ir el diálogo interior. Este tipo de soledad también nos permite soltar nuestras programaciones culturales hasta que nuestros corazones son restaurados a su inocencia original. Solidaridad. La verdadera solidaridad fluye de la comunión en soledad. Y al entrar en unión con Dios, descubrimos nuestra interconexión con la familia humana y con toda la creación. El servicio fluye de la solidaridad siguiendo las inspiraciones continuas del Espíritu Santo en la vida ordinaria, compartiendo nuestros dones y recursos. Quietud. Si el servicio fluye de la unidad, la quietud lo destila y purifica, llevándonos a la simplicidad. La simplicidad, dice el Padre Tomás, nos da la capacidad creciente de vivir en medio de los altibajos de la vida cotidiana sin perder nuestro ojo singular, nuestra visión unitiva. Y finalmente nos lleva a una creciente entrega. El total don de nuestro ser a Dios, moviéndonos de la unión a la unidad. If we had gathered in person, you would have received a booklet with these invitations for your own ongoing prayer and reflection. Sadly, we did not gather in person, but you will be able to download it as a PDF document. Its spacious format is designed to open windows as icons do into the presence, to be doorways into your own dance with God, in a source of deepening intimacy as you ponder personally and then share with one another in your respective communities. Si nos hubiéramos reunido en persona, habrían recibido un librito de invitaciones para su propia oración y reflexión. Tristemente no fue así, pero ustedes tienen la oportunidad de descargarlo como documento PDF. El librito tiene un formato espacioso. Está diseñado para abrir ventanas como los iconos lo hacen a la presencia divina, a ofrecer portales a su propia danza con Dios, para profundizar su intimidad al contemplarlos personalmente y también en el compartir unos con otros en nuestras respectivas comunidades. Tonight, instead of serving you a full banquet, we have offered you hors d'oeuvres, just a taste to remind you of holy ground you can live from and return to. Por hoy, en lugar de servirles un banquete completo, les hemos ofrecido solo unos bocadillos, unas probaditas para recordarles de este suelo santo desde donde podemos vivir y a donde podemos retornar. Noten las insinuaciones del Espíritu para cada uno en especial, al repasarlas ahora en silencio, en espíritu de oración. Notice where the Spirit may be nudging you, particularly today, as we review them now, silently and prayerfully. I abandon myself into your hands. Do with me what you will. Whatever you may do, I thank you. I am ready for all. I accept all. Let only your will be done in me and in all your creatures. I wish no more than this, O Lord. Into your hands I commend my soul. I offer it to you with all the love of my heart. For I love you, Lord, and so I need to give myself, to surrender myself into your hands without reserve and with boundless confidence, for you are my Padre mío. Me abandono a ti. Haz de mí lo que quieras. Lo que hagas de mí te lo agradezco. Estoy dispuesto a todo, lo acepto todo. Con tal que tu voluntad se haga en mí y en todas tus criaturas. No deseo nada más, Dios mío. Pongo mi vida en tus manos. Te la doy, Dios mío, con todo el amor de mi corazón porque te amo. Porque para mí amarte es darme, entregarme en tus manos sin medida, con infinita confianza, porque tú eres mi Padre.
Maru, thank you. Gracias. The beautiful invitation to enter into these invitations, these stages in the practice. Please go and download these booklets that Maru herself beautifully created for this conference as a companion for our practice together throughout the conference. We have one more video we'd like to show you before we hear from some of our speakers this evening. There are some folks from around the globe who would like to say hello throughout the conference. So they have sent in some postcards. We have video postcards from around the globe. And we'll be showing them periodically as we move through these next few days. And so we'd like to start with a very beautiful postcard from the Philippines. And just this is just an opportunity to enjoy the faces and the personalities and the richness of our global community.
That was beautiful. Thank you, Maru, and thank you, Philippines. And now we're going to move in a different direction. We are going to hear from 4 friends of Father Thomas sharing their memories. I'm going to begin by introducing Pat Johnson, and she will introduce the rest of the group. So Pat was born Patricia Eileen Reagan. No, she was born to Patricia Eileen Reagan and George Neil Stewart, raised Catholic in a small town where family and extended family were of primary importance. She was the oldest of 6 children. She married Bob Johnson, and they are the parents of 9 children, grandparents of 13, and great-grandparents of 15. Pat and Bob moved to Lama Foundation in 1982 and were only there 2 months when they met Father Thomas, who became Pat's teacher. She was the Lama liaison for 2 intensive retreats that Father Thomas led at Lama in 1983 and 84. She had the privilege in January and February of 1984 to leave the Lama Foundation for 3 weeks to serve an experimental retreat of 9 weeks at St. Benedict's Monastery in Snowmass. This extended an in-depth time at the monastery, led for Bob and Pat and their children, Sarah and Matthew, to move to Snowmass in 1984 in the fall. That began the Snowmass retreats. From 1984 on, Pat has been serving retreats at the monastery and elsewhere. So with great joy, I think many of us have met Pat at these retreats, and now we get to meet her here on Zoom. Pat, please join us. I'm looking for Pat Johnson, but I don't see her. Oh, here she is. Take it away.
Unmute. Okay. Yeah. Am I unmuted now, Carol? Okay. Well, before I introduce my beloved friends, Father Carl and Arico and Marie Howard, on behalf of the Board of Trustees, I would like to share with all of you the intention that the board set 2 nights ago that we were holding for the whole 2 days of the board retreat. And here it is. Our intention for the Contemplative Outreach International Conference, the Global Embrace, our Widening Reach, our Deepening Connection, is that there will be unity and joy and true connection to one another, that all technical internet connections will be strong, and that we will be of one mind, one heart, one spirit, joined in love with the one who is all in all. So this is the intention that the board has been holding for 2 days. And it's amazing how intention, Thomas used to say, you know, intention can carry you one hell of a long way. And we found that to be very true in this board meeting. So now I would like to introduce my beloved friend, Father Carl Arrico. And he sent a bio in. And the thing that really impressed me was his last statement, rather than his first few statements about who he is and what he had done. His last statement was, and this is who Carl is. Contemplative outreach is a miracle of God's grace and the power of prayer. This is who our Carl is. He's also a priest of the Diocese of Newark, New Jersey. He also is one of the founding fathers of Contemplative Outreach. He also served in many capacities, including Vice President of Contemplative Outreach. And most of all, he's been practicing centering prayer since 1975. So perhaps longer than any of us, since I didn't start until 1983, and I'm not sure when Marie started. Marie didn't send in a bio, but I can say about Marie that she came to us on retreat one January and landed there for her 50th birthday and had been serving in family dynamics for years in Iowa and had been traveling around doing her magic, which is indeed magic, and for years has been working with the volunteers. And if we ever want to remember anything, we go to Marie. She's a memory that is just absolutely incredible. So I am now going to turn it over to Carl, and he's going to, like the rest of us. Oh no, I think we're going to do Gilbert first, right? Correct? Okay.
Right.
Yeah. Gilberto, who was on our board of trustees and is just this unbelievable he's this joy boy, I call him. He just brings joy. He's just an amazing human being. And he's worked in Cuba for years and years, although he, I think, was born in Mississippi and spent years in the Dominican Republic. And Gilberto spent time in Spencer at St. Joseph's Abbey this summer and is now walking the Camino. So he sent us a recording as well as a great picture. So here's Gilberto.
I first met Father Thomas Keating in 1985, when as a Vincentian seminarian, I was studying theology at St. Thomas Seminary in Denver. Another seminarian and I had planned to make a private retreat at the monastery in Snowmass. When we arrived, we were greeted by Father Thomas, who was the guest master. After helping us get settled at the farmhouse and explaining to us the schedule of prayer at the monastery, he asked us if we were interested in learning centering prayer. We responded that we were both very interested and would be grateful to learn it from him. And Father Thomas graciously agreed to come down to the farmhouse every afternoon and share with us the method and the experience of centering prayer. And he invited us to continue the practice of the prayer after our retreat had ended. Our paths crossed again 16 years later in the Dominican Republic. For the first time, the annual conference of Contemplative Outreach was held outside the United States. Thomas also gave several talks to a packed auditorium in Santo Domingo the weekend before the conference. I received a special gift in one of his talks as he spoke of losing the self as the fixed point of reference, as being part of the contemplative journey. I experienced an existential sense of dread as Thomas shared his understanding of Jesus' wisdom saying, "Whoever seeks to preserve his life will lose it, but whoever loses it will save it." I still get butterflies in my stomach when I think about it. Since 2003, I have been assigned to mission work in Havana, Cuba. And certainly one of the highlights of my experience with Thomas was when he came to Havana for 2 days in March of 2006. Each evening he spoke to a crowd of some 300 people as he shared with us the experience and the background of centering prayer. To lead 300 Cubans into an experience of silent prayer for 20 minutes was a miracle at least as great as God's parting of the Red Sea in Exodus. St. Augustine proposed that to love another in the truest sense of the word is to desire for them the experience of God's love and then to lead them to it. The driving passion of Thomas Keating's life was to share with others the experience of God's love in the contemplative journey that is life. He knew that he couldn't accomplish this mission by himself, and so he began contemplative outreach to form and support others, especially lay people, in this process of transformation in Christ. Thomas desired that for us, and he led us to it. In that truest sense of the word, Thomas loved us.
Okay, there we go. So now we turn it over to Father Carl.
Well, thank you, Pat. I appreciate it. It's so good to be with my beloved Seer as we share of memories of Father Thomas. I mean, I've known him, I guess, for 49 years. So I've watched him grow, and I've watched myself grow. And it's been a wonderful experience, really, to have that time with him. I have a number of points that I like to do in the 10 minutes that's allotted me, and I promise you that if someone gives me the signal, I will stop immediately, okay? I think of this passage from John, chapter 7, verse 46. Never has a man spoken the way this man speaks. Never has a man spoken like this man speaks. And Gilberto's sharing reminded me of what happened at 9/11. And there was a little passage that Father Thomas put out as a statement right after 9/11 that I think was very powerful. I was in New York on September 11th. Listen to these words, okay? Some wounds are so deep, there can be no immediate relief, no comfort. There may even be an ocean of grief extending in every direction and apparently endless. In some ways, all suffering is in God. Thus, our pain is God's pain. And that means that in due time it will become, notice, in due time it will become life-giving and healing in the very measure of its intensity. Listening to the Spirit in silent prayer is key to knowing what to do. Action is more effective when it comes from that place. Now, here's the drama for me. Because we had scheduled, as Gilberto mentioned, in October of 2001, our annual conference in the Dominican Republic. The people in the Dominican Republic were already anticipating Thomas because 1 month before he arrived in October, they had talked to Patrica, whose husband owned Presidente Beer, and had convinced him that it would be a good idea to use all the billboards that were there in Dominican Republic. You can take that slide down. You came on too quickly now. Thank you. Okay. And for 1 month, they saw, rather than a bottle of beer and an invitation to have a good drink, come see Father Thomas at these 2 locations. So you imagine, day after day, they're driving around and there's Father Thomas. God only knows what the billboard was before, okay? I'm not going to even go into that. But come see Father Thomas. And lo and behold, the question was, would he come? Well, I remember the board met and discussed it. And the main message that came across was, we were not going to allow negative energy to overcome positive energy. And Father Thomas used to always say, utmost violence is overcome by utmost charity. And we did it under his leadership. He encouraged us really to go. And there were 140 people who had signed up for the conference. 96 came the next month after 9/11 to celebrate the whole idea of out of silence can come a force that's strong enough to change violence into something that is not going to be a problem. And he came, and we all came. And I'd like you to put that slide up now, Matt, please, for me, if you could. Because this is a slide of our opening session. Notice what it says, Contemplative Outreach International Meeting, October 10th to the 14th, 2001. Puerto Plata, Republic of Dominica. Notice the title, For a Global Transformation. And what's the title 20 years later here at our conference? A Global Embrace. And so the seeds were planted then and are blossoming now, thank goodness, really, through the power, really, of the Zoom and so on. But the beautiful point I like to make is the fact that we did it. The organization, the community of the Dominican Republic had the courage to go and make a statement that in a certain sense, we were not going to allow negative energy to change what we had intended to do. So we were at the conference. It was a wonderful hotel. We were well treated. Gail Fitzpatrick Hopper, the president, came up and everyone was laughing and cheering because she had on a Presidente sweatshirt on, which people who were there realized it was the beer, and she was the president, and there she was with the Presidente beer thing. Now, the funny thing about it is Father Thomas had such a good time. You always have a good time with the Dominican Republic people. They're just so wonderful and loving and hospitable. But one of the things that I got the biggest charge of is Father Thomas was walking around the hotel in his monk's outfit. And one of the most interesting sights, I don't know if you remember, was when he walked through the pool area. You want to see the look on the people bathing themselves then, where all of a sudden they looked up and here's this monk walking through them. I don't know if they did an examination of conscience or whatever else happened, but that was so funny to see Thomas feeling very comfortable in where he was. So I tell that story, the beauty of the people, the beauty of the outreach, the beauty of the opportunity really to feel strong enough to take a chance after what we experienced at 9/11. And 20 years after, here we are with a global embrace. The seeds were planted and they continue to grow with the intention of the board and so on. It's a wonderful experience. But Thomas had the courage to say, we're going to do it. We're going to do it. Now, on a more personal level, I was in 1983, I was at the Lama for the first retreat that Father Thomas put together. Gail Fitzpatrick Hopler was there, David Furnett was there, Bill Sheen was there, Mary Mrzowski was there, and we were so well taken care of by Pat Johnson, who was on the staff at that particular time, taking good care of us. Now, I was getting ready for this retreat, 15 days, and we were going to do intensive centering prayer. And I remember everybody who I was with and knew, was praying in a lotus position. Now, I'm a Catholic priest. I had to maintain Catholicism, I couldn't weaken in any way. I was training myself to go into a lotus position, sitting on the floor for prayer. I got a prayer bench because I couldn't do it the real way, tucked it under my butt, and I was going to be with the big guys and the big gals at this retreat. So day 1 goes by. Day 2 goes by. Day 3 goes by, and I am in utter pain, absolute utter pain. But I was going to hang in there, God forbid if I got up and sat on a chair. Nobody else was doing it. So I go into Father Thomas and I tell him this old story, Thomas is listening to me with his little smile and everything else. And he comes with a brilliant solution. He goes, why don't you sit on a chair? Why, I can't sit on a chair. Nobody is sitting on a chair. How can I sit on a chair? Why don't you stop worrying about what people are thinking? You know what's in your heart. Go sit on a chair. Well, the next session of centering prayer, yours truly gets up, brings a chair into the circle. And the accommodations were such that if you brought something different, there was an effort. Because there at the Lama, we were in our sleeping bags with kerosene lamps and everything else, outhouses and everything to go to. There's another story we're not going to go into. And so I came into the session, taking Father's advice, and I sit on the chair, mortified. We did 3 sections of 20 minutes each of centering prayer. I was mortified. What must people be thinking? Look at me here and everything else. The next session, 5 more chairs appeared in the circle. I went back to Father Thomas and I told him that. He says, well, by being yourself, you gave people the permission to be their self. And that was a wisdom statement for me. By being myself, I might give permission to other people to be their selves and be more authentic in what's going on in their lives. That
Thank
was
you.
a powerful, was it? Is my time up?
Your time is up. Thank you.
Welcome.
Pat, will you introduce the next person? But unmute, please.
Carl, I'm laughing because I'm remembering when we all went back for the 10-year anniversary at Chrysali's house with Mary and David, and we were all looking over the 10 years, and your statement was, well, I went into the Lama Foundation for that first retreat as American cheese, and I came out as Swiss cheese. I thought that was such a great visual. Like both Carl and Marie, there's hundreds and hundreds of stories that we could tell about Thomas's humanity. But the one I chose to tell tonight is an experience that I had with Thomas that impacted me more than anything else, of all the different occasions I had to witness his humanity. And there's a backstory to the story I'm going to tell. And the backstory is that the abbot of Snowmass, Joseph Boyle, and myself had been really, really concerned about the fact that the people that we were serving that were coming on retreat every single month were basically a white middle class clientele of retreatants. And we simply weren't attracting youth. We weren't attracting Black people. And I'd come down from Hermitage, a 7-day Hermitage, and had a meeting with Joseph. And Joseph and I said, okay, we were going to set an intention, knowing that intentions are very strong. We were going to set an intention to attract some Black persons to come on retreat. And about 2 weeks later, I received a phone call from a woman by the name of Marie Ruby in Pensacola, Florida. And she said that Mirabai Starr had been to her place to put on a weekend retreat, and had, when Mirabai found out that Marie Ruby was taking centering prayer into the prisons to an all-Black population and was heavily involved with a halfway house run by Willie Mae Dixon for women getting out of prison to live in and have their children there. And part of the structure of the halfway house, Pathways for Change, was that the women were doing centering prayer. And that was because of Marie Ruby's influence. So when Mirabai heard about Marie's interest in centering prayer and how she was fostering it not only in the prison, but in this Pathways for Change, this halfway house, Mirabai said, well, you should get in touch with Pat Johnson. Mirabai had lived at the Lama Foundation as a teenager, as a 14-year-old with our daughter, Beth Ann, who was a 14-year-old. So I get this phone call from Marie Ruby, and she told me that Mirabai had said, why don't you ask Pat and Thomas to come do an intro to your group? So Marie proposed this to me, and there were a few caveats. Number one is these people had no money for a retreat, and they couldn't take much time off work. They couldn't afford to take much time off work. So we were going to have to brainstorm to raise money to pay for the retreat. So Carol DeMarcellin and I got together, wrote a grant to the Trust for Meditation, and got it. And the grant money paid for almost the entire price of the Episcopal retreat center that was in Fairhopes, Alabama, which was right on the border of Pensacola, Florida. So everything was in place and the retreat dates were set. And Thomas got very ill with pneumonia and had maybe 3 or 4 bouts of pneumonia in a 6-week period. And the doctor said, "You're grounded. No flying. You are not leaving the monastery." So Thomas had me cancel every single engagement that he had scheduled for that period of 3 months, except the retreat with the Marie Ruby organization, which was going to be 20 Black persons from 4 different denominations. Bishop Gerard, the Catholic bishop, got to pick 5 people. The Episcopalian Church got to pick 5 people. The Evangelical Church got to pick 5 people. And the Baptist people got to pick 5 people. And Thomas kept putting off, and I kept saying to him, "Thomas, you know, you're not going to be able to do that retreat. You're going to have to cancel that reservation." He'd say, "Well, let's just wait and see." In the end, he convinced the abbot, because it was winter here and snowy and sunny and snowy, that going to Florida in the winter would be a very good idea because it'd be warm and he could walk and get strong. So Thomas and I prepared to go to Alabama. We got there and the weather was horrible. It was colder than here. Thomas was not feeling well. And even as he walked, I could tell he was doing pursed lip breathing as we were going through the airport and out of breath. So we made a deal that I would get the bishop and a few others to do the intro, and that he would sleep in the mornings, get up for lunch, and then have his question and answer with the people in the afternoon. And so this happened. There was myself and the bishop and a couple others that did the 4 sessions of the introductory. And it was just an amazing time to see how need determines function and how everyone just pulled together and pulled this thing off. And Marie Ruby and Thomas and I were the only white-skinned people in the place. And there was no sense of a difference of color of skin at all in the camaraderie and the workings of this retreat. But at the closing, everyone, if you've been at closings of retreats, everyone is expressing what they have, what their takeaway is going to be from the retreat. And Thomas listened to all of these statements. And then when it came his turn to speak, he said, I must ask for forgiveness for the years and years of oppression that my people have fostered on your people. And people, everything was silent in the room. And then one woman got up, crossed the room, knelt on her knees in front of Thomas, and sang this gospel song to him. And my takeaway from that retreat was it was so much bigger than a white man asking for forgiveness. It was Thomas representing the church asking for forgiveness for the oppression. So it was twofold. It was so huge that I can never speak of this without starting to cry because of the impact it had on me. And here, as Carl pointed out in his presentation, like he said, 20 years later, and here we've had a year of Black Lives Matter. We've had George Floyd. We've had everything that has come up. And Thomas was way ahead of his time. He's always been ahead of his time. So I only have that one story. But it is the Thomas's act of humanity that's impacted me most in all the years that I've had the honor and privilege of serving with him. And I turn it over to beloved Marie.
Thank you, Pat, and thank you, Carl. So I'm going to start out with quoting from a monk who was interviewed in the film that Thomas's nephew, Peter Jones, made of Thomas, called Thomas Keating, A Rising Tide of Silence. And one of the monks at Spencer was interviewed and asked to describe Thomas, and he said, he's the real deal. And so Pat has sort of led into this, and it's a nice segue. And also with what Carl was sharing about the experiences that they had at Lama, that how Thomas took these people to the mountaintop, if you will, and began this wonderful, wonderful, phenomenal journey that we're all on. And so I wanted to kind of think about what Thomas has given us to carry on with and to support us over the years. And so there are lots of books and lots of videos and so on, but primarily he gave us the Spiritual Journey series. And those were his presentations at his first talks for the intensive, the 10-day centering prayer intensive retreats that he would give at Snowmass. And in about 1986, they videotaped these conferences so they could take the retreat on the road. Carl, do you have your hand up? No? You're on mute. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were trying to speak. So anyway, when the retreats now are widespread because of these Spiritual Journey tapes. But the point I wanted to make about those are they're the very foundation for us. And Thomas was a storyteller, and this is about storytelling. This conference is kind of based on storytelling. And his storytelling within the spiritual journey tapes contains many what we would call modern day parables. And his parables would speak to the human condition. And he was so in tune with the human condition, his own, and how to help all of us discover the reality of who we are and this false self we've been carrying around for all of our lives. So I really felt that something should be said in storytelling about how Thomas loved to tell stories. And he would embellish them a bit, or sometimes he'd have a little humor. And when you listen to those spiritual journey tapes as often as some of us have over the years, you learned to anticipate the story that was coming. So you might even laugh before the story is told because you knew the outcome. But the things that I learned from Thomas that were so very important in my life were that God loves me just as I am and doesn't care about my mistakes of the past and is only really about the present moment. And I needed to hear that. I was never living in the present moment. I was a person that carried a lot of what will people think, as Carl mentioned. And I was also carrying around the feeling that I didn't measure up. So throughout that spiritual journey progression, if you will, you get all of these answers to all of these things that make impediments for us to be, if you will, in a better relationship with God, because we didn't feel like we measured up. And I really would just call attention to the one tape that many of you who know these tapes back and forth, like several people do, tape number 12 is one of my favorites because it's called The Four Consents. And in that last half hour of that tape, Thomas tells the story of the monk Bernie O'Shea. If you haven't watched these tapes, and if you haven't ever had the experience of a retreat with the tapes, we do have them available on our Contemplative Outreach website under our YouTube segment, and they're free. So you might want to look them up. But the Bernie story shows what Pat mentioned, that Thomas did naturally in Florida. His forgiveness, his apology. And Bernie O'Shea was already passed away when Thomas made this tape, but he really wanted to share that Thomas let the rules, that he was an abbot, and Bernie had a creative spirit. And Bernie, when Thomas was gone one day, decorated and did some things that were totally inappropriate for Thomas's view. So when Thomas came back, he made him take all of that down. But Thomas, in his heart, as he grew and as he changed, and as Carl said, we all witnessed him evolve. He understood how he had hurt Bernie so much that he needed to ask his forgiveness in this way through a story that could be shared by all of us or whoever comes along and after us even. So another example I wanted to make was that Thomas did see good in all creation and in all peoples. And he didn't hold grudges. And he suffered a lot himself over the critics over the years. But I observed him, and every time one of those came by, he quietly picked up his cross and went forward with his belief that he had the mission to pass this prayer and this contemplative journey on to all of us, especially lay people in the world. So he was a model and an example of a person that I certainly didn't measure up to his intelligence in any way or form. I didn't always understand everything the first time I heard it, or the second even, or the third even. But he gave me enough to, if you will, have a new beginning at 50. Pat said I was 50 when I made my first retreat at Snowmass in 1987. So that gives my age away. But, you know, I will just share two little examples that I think were very important that I saw him do when he would instruct people. He had a two-step process that he used a lot of the times, and I experienced it. And I'll just share two of the times I experienced it. His first step was to put the finger on the point, and then he'd take a breath, and then he'd come back and give you a little kernel of hope for the future, if it was a little bit stern in the first place. So I went on my first retreat that Pat mentioned. I went into him for an interview. He called it interviews. You got 15 minutes with him. And I sat down and I said to him, you know, Father Thomas, I was a lot more fun before I got into this thing. And he looked at me and he didn't laugh at me or anything. He just looked at me and he said, well, you're probably a whole lot more honest now. Then he took a breath. And his second point, I wouldn't worry about it. You're going to be fun again. So that was an example of how he would put his finger on the point and then give you a little courage to go out and hang in there with this prayer. The second little example, Carol, do I have time for the second one? Are you nodding? Okay, so the second example was with the welcoming prayer. Thomas used to call together groups of about 15 or 20 and squeeze us all into the farmhouse at Snowmass because there wasn't any retreat house yet there. And he would call these issues, or there were just little times for to get together and take care of questions that were coming up so he could write his next book, probably. We didn't say that at the time. But anyway, we were having one of these meetings and we took a break. And the woman sitting next to me was Monica Freeman. And some of you may know her from the past. She was a wonderful woman who started the Living Flame program. And Monica and I hadn't known each other very well. So she said to me during the break, let's take a walk. I want to get to know you better. So we went out in the backyard of this farmhouse and there was a big boulder. I think you call them boulders in Colorado. Sometimes I just call them rocks, but a boulder. So we went out and sat on this boulder and I started telling her about my story. And all of a sudden I choked up and I didn't have any words. I couldn't say anything. She gently reached out to me and she put her hand on my arm and just said, let's be quiet and let's welcome this. And she taught me the welcoming prayer on the spot in a moment of need. So the break is over and I go back in the farmhouse and Thomas is standing on the front porch and he's all by himself. So I go up to him and I say, oh, Thomas, something really just happened to me that really just so surprised me. And I told him the story that I couldn't speak because I was emotionally bothered by what I was telling her. And he gently looked at me and said, where did you get the idea that because you dealt with that once, that it was going to be healed permanently? You may have a lot of work to do on that yet. Then he paused and he said, but you now have the tools to do it with, and you have the prayer. Wow. So my conclusion is he's the real deal. And we are so lucky to have had him in our lives and still to have him via the videos and the books and all the people now, all of you, all of the volunteers and all of the people yet to come who are going to pass this on and share the prayer as widely as possible. Another one of the quotes from the guidelines of the vision, Carol. So thank you all very much.
Can I make a comment?
You may.
May I ask you a question? You're a very famous person, you know, because you were on the retreat that they filmed the spiritual journey on, right?
No, I was on the first retreat without Thomas.
Oh, that's right. Before
Thomas
they
had
even-
broken his neck and was in the
Okay.
infirmary.
That's right.
We were the first experiment, though, without the tapes. I mean, without him in person.
Right. So you got to see the tapes for the first time.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. I knew there was a very important moment that you were
It was.
involved in there.
Pat Johnson told me later, she didn't show it at the time, but she said the staff was really nervous about that retreat without Thomas being, remember Pat? He said that you
Well,
were really,
Yeah, for one thing, you know, it was like I went to visit Thomas in the hospital and I said, Thomas, we've got a full retreat in January. You know, what are we going to do? And he, yeah.
What did he say? What did he say?
Oh, well, the thing is that, you know, Grace Huffman had wanted to pay the 10 grand to have these things filmed.
Right.
And Matheson and I had said, no way, you're not going to have a film crew in our meditation room. And Thomas kept persisting. And of course, Thomas got his way and Grace did also. And these films were made, you know, and this was in October that the films were made. January, we had to use them. So, but we had fought him. So when I went to the hospital, you know, we can't do this retreat. And so he put his finger in his mouth like he did, and he went, well, we could use those tapes. But, you know, it was a whole new beginning for us because
It was.
Thomas did everything. He would come down to do every mass, every conference,
Right.
every sit and talk with the retreatants.
Right.
That we were using the tape. The staff got thrown in to doing sits and talks. We had never done that.
Right.
So, you know, it was a whole new formation for us. And at the end of the retreat, I said to all the retreatants, well, what do you think about tapes instead of Thomas being here? They loved it. This led to us giving 12 retreats a year.
Marie, tell your story.
we said, Pat, I remember this well. He
No.
came down for the closing. Abbot Joseph brought him down to the closing, and we were all sitting there, you know, with our just mesmerized by him in our midst. And so then they go back and we have our evaluation. And so Pat asked us what we thought about having the tapes, and we all agreed, all of us, it was unanimous. We liked the tapes because we felt we listened to the content more
Right,
because he
right.
wasn't there. We
Right.
felt that we were too impressed by him. So the tapes worked and they still do.
Right.
Right.
Well, and not only that, it meant, you know, with Thomas doing everything, mass, 2 conferences, all the sits and talks, he had energy for 5 retreats a year. Right after that, we started doing 12 retreats a year.
Right.
And really serving the needs. Because
Right.
people wanted to come, you know?
Yep. Yep.
And
And it
by the
also
90s,
it
Carl.
also gave us an opportunity to do the retreats outside of
Outside.
Snowmass.
right.
That you didn't have to go to Snowmass, you know, to hear Thomas and have the experience. And that's when it went on the road, it began to just multiply.
Right.
Oh, I'm
Yeah.
going to have to cut you off here. We'd love to spend the whole night listening to stories, but I think some people in New York are already ready to go to bed.
Well, I'm in New York. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's a treasure. So I really appreciate all you've done and
Thank you.
shared with us. And I'm going to turn it back to Mark, who's going to lead us to our next moment.
Good job, everyone.
Very good job.
Good
Gracias.
job.
Thank you, all of you, for sharing. It's wonderful to hear stories and also to remember on whose shoulders which we stand, and we want that for this conference. We want to look back and also look ahead, and so we want to give all of you, and we'll do this throughout the conference, an opportunity to also tell stories and also say where you are now. The root of the word conference means to confer. And confer means to really just bring together and to carry together and to be together. So that's what we hope for the conference. So we want to give you an opportunity now, just for a few moments, because the hour is growing late for some, or growing early for some, I don't know. But we want to be able to break our large group down into smaller groups in a couple of little breakout sessions. So we just want to do a short one now, a time of brief conversation in a smaller group, where you might share a memory of your own, either of an experience you had with Thomas, or maybe the experience that you understood of Thomas just through his work, his writing, or perhaps a story about your beginning in centering prayer, how that happened for you, and where you are now as a result of that. So we'll give you probably 15 minutes or so in the small groups, and we'll just break you out randomly so that you have a smaller space to reflect and to share. And because of that, the intimacy of that space, we ask that, we understand that can be personal. And so we enter into these smaller groups with a sense of trust in one another. And also know that you can share or not share. Feel free to remain silent if you don't have anything to share at this point. And the other thing is just share from your own personal experience rather than abstract ideas. And finally, we're not entering these groups as kind of therapy groups, so there's no need to have to cure all your ills or pains or remove any of the difficulties in your life. That we're not trying to do that. And God does the healing. We're just here to share it together. So with that, I'll ask our tech folks, Chris and Matt, to help us to randomly break out into groups